Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a manufacturing company in Mobile, Alabama, implemented a new policy requiring all employees to return to in-office work immediately, without offering remote work options or considering individual employee circumstances that may have arisen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential legal and ethical implications of this policy under Alabama labor and employment law? Option A. Immediately enforcing the return to office policy, as stated, assuming that Alabama's employment at will doctrine permits any such directive without further consideration. Option B. Informing employees that any refusal to return to the office will be considered voluntary resignation, without exploring alternative solutions or accommodations. Option C. Relying on informal discussions with other local businesses to gauge acceptable practices for returning employees to the workplace. Option D. Reviewing current guidance from the Alabama Department of Labor and the EOC, and developing a flexible return-to-office plan that includes provisions for remote work where feasible and a clear process for employees to request reasonable accommodations under the ADA for health-related concerns. The correct answer is D. Reviewing current guidance from the Alabama Department of Labor and the EOC, and developing a flexible return-to-office plan that includes provisions for remote work where feasible and a clear process for employees to request reasonable accommodations under the ADA for health-related concerns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the evolving nature of employment law in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to balance employer obligations with employee well-being and legal compliance within Alabama. The rapid changes in public health guidance and the potential for differing interpretations of existing statutes require careful judgment to avoid legal repercussions and maintain a fair workplace. The employer must navigate potential discrimination claims, ensure compliance with wage and hour laws, and address workplace safety concerns, all while considering the specific nuances of Alabama's labor laws. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and informed approach. This means diligently researching and adhering to the most current guidance from the Alabama Department of Labor and the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC, regarding COVID-19 workplace issues. This includes understanding how federal laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, were applicable and still in effect or its principles are being applied, interact with Alabama's specific employment statutes. Employers should implement clear, written policies that address remote work, sick leave, reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities or health concerns, and protocols for managing potential exposure or outbreaks, ensuring these policies are communicated effectively to all staff. This approach prioritizes legal compliance, employee safety, and equitable treatment, minimizing the risk of litigation and fostering a stable work environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on general news reports or anecdotal advice from other businesses without consulting official state and federal labor department guidance. This can lead to misinterpretations of legal requirements, potentially resulting in violations of Alabama's wage and hour laws, discrimination under the ADA, or failure to provide legally mandated leave. Another incorrect approach is to ignore employee requests for accommodations related to COVID-19 concerns, citing a lack of specific COVID-19 legislation in Alabama. This fails to recognize that existing Alabama and federal anti-discrimination laws, such as the ADA, still apply and require employers to engage in the interactive process to determine reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities or medical conditions exacerbated by the pandemic. A third incorrect approach is to implement mandatory vaccination policies or strict return-to-office mandates without considering potential medical exemptions or reasonable accommodations required by the ADA, or without understanding the nuances of Alabama's employment at will doctrine in relation to such policies. This can expose the employer to claims of discrimination or wrongful termination. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that emphasizes continuous learning and adaptation. This involves establishing a reliable system for monitoring updates from relevant government agencies, including the Alabama Department of Labor and the EOC, when faced with novel situations like those presented by the pandemic. Professionals should consult legal counsel specializing in Alabama employment law to ensure policies and practices are compliant. They should also prioritize clear, consistent, and documented communication with employees regarding workplace policies and expectations, and maintain an open dialogue to address employee concerns and requests for accommodations. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that a long-tenured employee, aged 58, in a key administrative role at a manufacturing facility in Mobile, Alabama, is perceived by some newer managers as being less adaptable to recent software upgrades and potentially less energetic than younger staff. The company is considering a restructuring that would eliminate this employee's specific role, with the possibility of offering a less senior position or a severance package. What is the most legally sound and ethically responsible course of action for the employer? Option A. Reassign the employee to a newly created, less demanding role that is demonstrably lower in status and pay, based on the assumption that this will be a more suitable position given their age and perceived energy levels. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, objective performance review of the employee, documenting specific job duties, performance metrics, and any documented instances of underperformance or areas for improvement, while simultaneously evaluating the genuine business necessity for the role elimination and exploring alternative positions within the company that align with the employee's skills and experience. Option C. Initiate discussions with the employee about their retirement plans, suggesting that the restructuring presents a convenient opportunity for them to transition into retirement, and offer a severance package contingent on their immediate departure. Option D. Proceed with the restructuring by eliminating the employee's role, citing the need for modernization and increased efficiency, and offer a severance package that includes a release of claims under the IDEA, assuming the employee will likely accept due to their age. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive, objective performance review of the employee, documenting specific job duties, performance metrics, and any documented instances of underperformance or areas for improvement, while simultaneously evaluating the genuine business necessity for the role elimination and exploring alternative positions within the company that align with the employee's skills and experience. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing legitimate business needs with the strict prohibitions against age discrimination under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act (ADEA), as applied in Alabama. The employer must avoid making employment decisions based on stereotypes or assumptions about older workers' capabilities or productivity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any employment action is based on objective, non-discriminatory factors. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the employee's performance and the business necessity of the proposed action, documented meticulously. This means evaluating the employee's actual job performance against established, objective standards and considering whether the proposed restructuring or role elimination is genuinely driven by business needs rather than age. If the employee's performance is satisfactory and the role is still essential, the employer must explore alternatives that do not disproportionately impact older workers. This approach aligns with the ADEA mandate to prevent discrimination based on age and Alabama's adherence to federal employment law. An approach that relies on assumptions about an older employee's willingness to adapt to new technologies or their perceived reduced energy levels is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes direct or indirect age discrimination, violating the ADEA. Similarly, implementing a reduction in force that disproportionately targets older employees without a clear, objective business justification, and without considering less discriminatory alternatives is a violation. Furthermore, offering a severance package that is contingent on waiving ADEA rights without proper disclosure and a sufficient consideration period, as mandated by the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act (OPA) amendments to the ADEA, is also legally flawed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective data and legal compliance. This involves 1. Clearly defining the business need or performance issue. 2. Gathering objective evidence to support any proposed action. 3. Consulting with legal counsel to ensure compliance with the ADEA and any relevant Alabama-specific employment laws. 4. Exploring all reasonable alternatives that minimize the risk of age discrimination. And 5. Documenting the entire process thoroughly. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that addressing potential employment discrimination proactively is crucial. In Alabama, an employee alleges they were denied a promotion solely because of their race, citing specific instances of discriminatory comments made by their direct supervisor. What is the most appropriate and legally defensible course of action for the employer? Option A. Initiate a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation into the employee's allegations, involving interviews with the employee, the supervisor, and any relevant witnesses, and a review of promotion criteria and selection processes. Option B. Immediately offer the employee a severance package to avoid potential legal disputes without conducting any investigation into the alleged discrimination. Option C. Dismiss the employee's complaint as unsubstantiated without further inquiry, given the employee's performance history which is perceived as average. Option D. Reassign the complaining employee to a less desirable department to prevent further disruption, while the supervisor's actions are informally reviewed. The correct answer is A. Initiate a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation into the employee's allegations, involving interviews with the employee, the supervisor, and any relevant witnesses, and a review of promotion criteria and selection processes. Explanation: cost-benefit analysis shows that proactive measures to prevent employment discrimination are more economically sound and ethically responsible than dealing with the aftermath of a lawsuit. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial implications of an action with the long-term legal and reputational risks associated with potential employment discrimination under Alabama law. The employer must navigate the complexities of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as applied in Alabama, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the employee's complaint, conducted by an impartial party. This process should include interviewing relevant individuals, reviewing documentation, and assessing the credibility of all parties involved. This is the best professional practice because it directly addresses the substance of the discrimination claim, gathers necessary facts for a determination, and demonstrates a commitment to fair employment practices as mandated by federal law and enforced in Alabama. Such an investigation is crucial for identifying any discriminatory practices and taking appropriate corrective action, thereby mitigating legal liability and fostering a more inclusive workplace. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the complaint without a formal inquiry, perhaps due to the employee's perceived low value to the company or the perceived cost of an investigation. This fails to uphold the employer's legal obligation to investigate all allegations of discrimination. It creates significant legal risk under Title VII, as a failure to investigate can be interpreted as a constructive admission of discriminatory intent or a failure to take prompt and effective remedial action. Ethically, it undermines employee trust and signals a disregard for their rights. Another incorrect approach is to immediately offer a settlement to the employee without conducting any investigation. While settlement can be a resolution tool, doing so without understanding the facts of the alleged discrimination can set a dangerous precedent. It may encourage frivolous claims and does not address the root cause of potential discrimination within the organization. Furthermore, it fails to fulfill the employer's duty to investigate and potentially correct discriminatory practices, leaving the company vulnerable to future claims and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach is to retaliate against the employee for raising the complaint, such as by demoting them or assigning unfavorable tasks. This is a direct violation of anti-retaliation provisions under Title VII. Such actions are not only illegal, but also create a hostile work environment and can lead to severe penalties, including punitive damages, in addition to the original discrimination claim. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with taking all discrimination complaints seriously. The next step is to initiate a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation. This involves gathering all relevant facts and evidence. Based on the findings, the employer should then determine if discrimination occurred and implement appropriate corrective actions, which may include disciplinary measures, policy changes, or training. Throughout this process, maintaining confidentiality and avoiding any form of retaliation are paramount. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a potential Title VII violation at an Alabama-based manufacturing company, where an employee alleges that their supervisor consistently assigns them less desirable tasks and provides fewer opportunities for overtime compared to colleagues of a different national origin. What is the most appropriate initial response for the company's human resources department to mitigate legal risk and ensure compliance with Title Roman 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Option A. Immediately initiate a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation into the employee's specific allegations, including interviewing the employee, the supervisor, and relevant colleagues, and reviewing relevant work assignments and overtime records. Option B. Advise the employee that their concerns are likely unfounded given the company's strong performance reviews and suggest they focus on improving their own work output. Option C. Inform the supervisor of the allegations and instruct them to cease any potentially discriminatory practices without conducting a formal investigation to avoid escalating the situation. Option D. Document the complaint but defer any investigation until a formal EOC charge is filed, as the company believes it is unlikely to be a substantive issue. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation into the employee's specific allegations, including interviewing the employee, the supervisor, and relevant colleagues, and reviewing relevant work assignments and overtime records. Explanation: the risk matrix shows a potential Title Roman 7 violation, which makes this scenario professionally challenging because it involves allegations of discrimination based on protected characteristics, a serious legal and ethical matter with significant consequences for both the employee and the employer. Navigating such claims requires careful adherence to federal law and a commitment to fair employment practices. The best professional approach involves a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into the employee's allegations. This means gathering all relevant facts, interviewing all parties involved, and reviewing pertinent documentation without prejudging the outcome. This approach is correct because Title Roman 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Employers have a legal obligation to investigate complaints of discrimination promptly and effectively to prevent and remedy unlawful practices. A thorough investigation ensures that the employer can make an informed decision about whether a violation occurred and take appropriate corrective action, thereby mitigating legal risk and fostering a fair workplace. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the employee's concerns without a proper investigation, perhaps due to the employee's perceived performance issues or the employer's desire to avoid conflict. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly contravenes the employer's duty to address discrimination claims under Title Roman 7. Failing to investigate can be interpreted as condoning discriminatory behavior and can lead to significant legal liability, including back pay, compensatory damages, and punitive damages, as well as reputational harm. Another incorrect approach would be to retaliate against the employee for raising the complaint. This is professionally unacceptable, as Title Roman 7 explicitly prohibits retaliation against employees who oppose discriminatory practices or participate in discrimination investigations. Retaliation is a separate and serious violation of federal law, compounding the initial alleged discrimination and leading to further legal penalties. A third incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial or biased investigation, where the employer only seeks information that supports a predetermined conclusion or fails to interview key witnesses. This is professionally unacceptable because it undermines the integrity of the process and fails to fulfill the employer's obligation to conduct a fair and thorough inquiry. Such an investigation would not provide a reliable basis for decision-making and could expose the employer to liability for failing to take prompt and effective remedial action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance with Title Roman 7 and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Recognizing the seriousness of discrimination allegations and the legal obligations under Title Roman 7. 2. Initiating a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation upon receiving a complaint. 3. Documenting all steps of the investigation meticulously. 4. Making decisions based on the findings of the investigation and applicable law. 5. Taking appropriate remedial action if discrimination is found, and ensuring no retaliation occurs. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that a retail store in Birmingham, Alabama, has received a request from a long-term employee with a diagnosed autoimmune condition for a modified work schedule that would allow them to avoid peak customer traffic hours, which exacerbate their symptoms. The store manager is concerned about maintaining adequate staffing during these busy periods. What is the most appropriate course of action for the store manager to take in accordance with Alabama's interpretation of the Americans with Disabilities Act? Option A. Inform the employee that their condition does not appear to be severe enough to warrant a schedule modification and advise them to manage their symptoms independently. Option B. Deny the request outright, stating that the employee's requested schedule change would disrupt business operations and that the store cannot accommodate such a modification. Option C. Implement a temporary, uncommunicated schedule change for the employee that attempts to mitigate their symptoms, but does not involve direct discussion or agreement with the employee about its effectiveness or long-term viability. Option D. Initiate a formal interactive process with the employee to discuss their condition, the specific limitations it imposes, and to explore potential reasonable accommodations, including alternative scheduling options that would allow them to perform the essential functions of their job without causing undue hardship to the business. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal interactive process with the employee to discuss their condition, the specific limitations it imposes, and to explore potential reasonable accommodations, including alternative scheduling options, that would allow them to perform the essential functions of their job without causing undue hardship to the business. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing an employer's legitimate business needs with an employee's rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA), as interpreted by Alabama law. The employer must avoid discriminatory practices while ensuring operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to assess whether the requested accommodation is reasonable and would impose an undue hardship. The best professional approach involves engaging in a good-faith interactive process with the employee to explore potential accommodations. This process, mandated by the ADA and applied in Alabama, requires open communication to identify the precise limitations caused by the disability and to brainstorm effective solutions. The employer should consider all reasonable accommodations that would enable the employee to perform the essential functions of their job without causing undue hardship to the business. This includes exploring modifications to the work environment, job duties, or work schedules. Documenting this process thoroughly is crucial. An incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the request based on a superficial assessment of inconvenience. This fails to acknowledge the employer's legal obligation to explore accommodations and can lead to a finding of discrimination. Another incorrect approach is to offer a solution that does not effectively address the employee's limitations or that creates new barriers without further consultation. This demonstrates a lack of genuine engagement in the interactive process. Finally, assuming the employee is exaggerating their limitations or that the disability is not severe enough to warrant accommodation without proper investigation is also a failure, as it bypasses the required assessment and can lead to discriminatory outcomes. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the employee's specific needs and limitations through direct communication. They should then research potential accommodations that are both effective for the employee and feasible for the business. If an accommodation seems to impose an undue hardship, the employer must be able to demonstrate this through objective evidence and should continue to explore alternative accommodations. The entire process should be documented to show good faith efforts. Question 6. Regulatory review indicates that a manufacturing company in Birmingham, Alabama, is experiencing a strike by its production employees. The company's management is considering implementing a temporary lockout of all employees, including non-striking administrative staff, to exert economic pressure on the union and encourage a swift resolution to the labor dispute. What is the most legally sound and strategically advisable course of action for the company to consider in this situation? Option A. Engage in direct, individual negotiations with striking employees to offer them separate deals to return to work, bypassing the union leadership. Option B. Implement a lockout of only the striking production employees, while allowing non-striking administrative staff to continue working as a direct response to the strike. Option C. Immediately hire permanent replacements for all striking employees to ensure continued operations and demonstrate the company's resolve to the union. Option D. Implement a temporary lockout of all employees, provided it is carefully structured to be a defensive measure to protect against economic harm or to prevent the union from gaining an undue bargaining advantage. and after consulting with legal counsel to ensure compliance with federal and Alabama labor laws. The correct answer is D. Implement a temporary lockout of all employees, provided it is carefully structured to be a defensive measure to protect against economic harm or to prevent the union from gaining an undue bargaining advantage, and after consulting with legal counsel to ensure compliance with federal and Alabama labor laws. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the delicate balance between an employer's right to manage its business and employees' rights to engage in concerted activities, particularly during a labor dispute in Alabama. Navigating these rights requires a thorough understanding of the Alabama Labor Peace Act and relevant federal labor law principles, as interpreted by Alabama courts. The potential for escalation, legal repercussions, and damage to both employee morale and business operations necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach involves a strategic assessment of the employer's operational needs and the legal limitations on employer actions during a strike. This means carefully considering whether a lockout is a permissible economic weapon under Alabama law, or if it constitutes an unfair labor practice. The employer must analyze if the lockout is intended to pressure the union to accept management's proposals, or if it is a defensive measure to protect against irreparable harm, or to prevent the union from gaining an undue advantage. This requires consulting with legal counsel to ensure compliance with the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, as applied in Alabama, and specifically to determine if the lockout is a legitimate response to union tactics, or if it is designed to undermine the union's bargaining power unlawfully. The employer must also consider the potential impact on non-striking employees and the public. An incorrect approach would be to implement a lockout solely as a punitive measure against striking employees, without a clear economic justification, or in a manner that appears designed to destroy the union's ability to represent its members. This could be construed as an unfair labor practice under the NLRA, which is applicable to most private sector employers in Alabama. Another incorrect approach would be to engage in direct negotiations with individual striking employees, bypassing the union entirely, as this undermines the principle of collective bargaining and could be seen as an attempt to coerce employees, violating their rights. Furthermore, hiring permanent replacements without proper consideration of the legal implications and the employer's obligations under the NLRA would be a flawed strategy, as it can lead to protracted legal battles and significant back pay liability if deemed an unfair labor practice. Professionals should approach such situations by first seeking expert legal counsel specializing in Alabama labor law. A comprehensive risk assessment should be conducted, evaluating the potential legal, financial, and operational consequences of each potential action. This includes understanding the specific rights and obligations of both the employer and the union under federal and state law, and considering alternative dispute resolution mechanisms before resorting to potentially contentious actions like lockouts. The decision-making process should prioritize lawful conduct, strategic objectives, and the long-term health of the employer-employee relationship. Question 7. Performance analysis shows a manager in an Alabama-based company has received a formal complaint alleging sexual harassment by a senior employee. The complainant has provided specific details and named potential witnesses. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company to take to comply with Alabama labor and employment law? Option A. Immediately launch a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation, interviewing the complainant, the accused, and any identified witnesses, documenting all findings, and taking appropriate remedial action based on the evidence. Option B. Dismiss the complaint without a formal investigation, assuming the accusation is unfounded due to the senior employee's long tenure and positive performance reviews. Option C. Postpone the investigation until after the company's busy season concludes, as addressing the complaint promptly would disrupt ongoing projects. Option D. Terminate the senior employee's employment immediately upon receiving the complaint, without conducting any investigation. The correct answer is A. Immediately launch a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation, interviewing the complainant, the accused, and any identified witnesses, documenting all findings, and taking appropriate remedial action based on the evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need to address a serious allegation of sexual harassment with the rights of the accused employee and the company's legal obligations under Alabama law. A hasty or improperly handled investigation can lead to significant legal liability for the employer, including claims of wrongful termination, defamation, and failure to provide a safe workplace. The employer must act promptly and impartially to gather facts, protect all parties involved, and take appropriate remedial action if harassment is found. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation. This approach directly addresses the employer's duty under Alabama law to prevent and promptly correct any unlawful harassment. It involves interviewing the complainant, the accused, and any potential witnesses, documenting all findings, and making a determination based on the evidence. If harassment is substantiated, appropriate disciplinary action, up to and including termination, should be taken, along with measures to prevent recurrence. This aligns with the principles of due process and the employer's responsibility to maintain a workplace free from harassment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the complaint without a proper investigation, especially if the accused is a high-performing employee. This fails to meet the employer's legal obligation under Alabama law to investigate and address all credible harassment claims. Can expose the company to liability for creating or condoning a hostile work environment and may be seen as retaliatory if the complainant faces adverse action. Another incorrect approach is to immediately terminate the accused employee based solely on the accusation, without conducting a fair and thorough investigation. This violates the accused employee's right to due process and can lead to wrongful termination lawsuits. Alabama law requires a reasonable investigation to determine the facts before imposing disciplinary action. A further incorrect approach is to delay the investigation significantly, citing workload or other priorities. Such delays can be interpreted as a failure to take prompt action, which is a key requirement under Alabama's employment laws. Prolonged delays can also allow the alleged harassment to continue, exacerbating the harm and increasing the employer's legal exposure. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding their legal obligations under Alabama's specific labor and employment laws. This includes recognizing the employer's affirmative duty to prevent and address sexual harassment. A systematic approach involving prompt reporting, impartial investigation, thorough documentation, and appropriate remedial action is crucial. When faced with an allegation, the immediate step should be to secure the well-being of the complainant, initiate the investigation without delay, and ensure all parties are treated fairly and with respect throughout the process. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that a manufacturing company in Mobile, Alabama, has recently implemented a new layoff policy that prioritizes employees with less than 5 years of service for redundancy. Following the implementation of this policy, a significant number of older, long-term employees who are predominantly of a protected age class have been laid off. An employee who was laid off under this policy has filed a complaint alleging discrimination. Which approach best addresses the legal implications of this situation under Alabama labor and employment law? Option A. Focus solely on the employer's lack of intent to discriminate, arguing that the policy was applied neutrally to all employees with less than 5 years of service. Option B. Immediately assume the claim is one of disparate treatment and demand direct evidence of discriminatory animus against the laid-off employee. Option C. Conduct an impact assessment to determine if the layoff policy, despite its neutral wording, has a disproportionately negative effect on employees in a protected class, and if so, evaluate if the policy is a business necessity. Option D. Dismiss the complaint without further investigation, as the layoff policy was applied uniformly based on tenure. The correct answer is C. Conduct an impact assessment to determine if the layoff policy, despite its neutral wording, has a disproportionately negative effect on employees in a protected class, and if so, evaluate if the policy is a business necessity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires distinguishing between two distinct legal theories of discrimination under Alabama law, each with different proof burdens and analytical frameworks. Mischaracterizing the claim can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for the employer. Careful judgment is required to correctly identify the nature of the alleged discrimination to ensure an appropriate legal defense and response. The best professional approach involves recognizing that the employer's stated reason for the layoff, while seemingly neutral, may have a disproportionately negative effect on a protected class. This requires an impact assessment to determine if the layoff policy, even if facially neutral, results in a statistically significant adverse impact on a protected group. If such an impact is found, the employer must then demonstrate that the policy is job-related and consistent with business necessity. This aligns with the principles of disparate impact analysis, which focuses on the consequences of employment practices rather than the employer's intent. Alabama law, like federal law, prohibits employment discrimination, and understanding the nuances of disparate impact is crucial for compliance. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the employer's lack of discriminatory intent. While a lack of intent is a defense to disparate treatment claims, it does not absolve an employer from liability under disparate impact theory. If the employer assumes the layoff was not discriminatory simply because they did not intend to discriminate, they fail to consider the potential adverse effects of their facially neutral policy on a protected group, which is the essence of disparate impact. Another incorrect approach is to immediately assume the situation is a disparate treatment claim and demand proof of direct evidence of discriminatory animus. Disparate treatment requires showing that the employer intentionally treated an individual differently because of their protected characteristic. If the employee's claim is based on the statistical outcome of the layoff rather than specific evidence of intentional discrimination against them personally, this approach would misdirect the defense and fail to address the core of a potential disparate impact claim. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the claim outright without any investigation into the layoff's demographic outcomes. This demonstrates a failure to engage with the possibility of indirect discrimination. Alabama employers have a responsibility to ensure their employment practices do not have discriminatory effects, even if unintended. A thorough investigation, including an impact assessment, is a fundamental step in professional decision-making for such situations. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the employee's allegations. If the allegations suggest a pattern of adverse outcomes for a protected group, even if the employer's actions were facially neutral, the employer should consider the possibility of a disparate impact claim. This necessitates an impact assessment to gather data and analyze the effects of the employment practice. If an adverse impact is identified, the employer must then assess whether the practice is a business necessity. If the allegations clearly point to intentional differential treatment based on a protected characteristic, then the focus shifts to a disparate treatment analysis, requiring evidence of intent. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that a manufacturing company in Alabama has a significant underrepresentation of women in its skilled trades positions. To address this, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant approach for the company to implement its affirmative action policy? Option A. Cease all specific recruitment efforts for women in skilled trades, as affirmative action policies can be perceived as discriminatory. Option B. Develop targeted outreach programs to recruit qualified female candidates from vocational schools and trade associations, and ensure job descriptions and interview processes are reviewed for potential bias. Option C. Focus exclusively on promoting existing male employees into skilled trades roles, assuming that internal candidates are the most qualified. Option D. Immediately implement a policy to hire at least 2 women for every man hired into skilled trades positions until parity is achieved. The correct answer is B. Develop targeted outreach programs to recruit qualified female candidates from vocational schools and trade associations, and ensure job descriptions and interview processes are reviewed for potential bias. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the legal mandate of affirmative action with the practical realities of recruitment and the potential for perceived or actual discrimination. A company's commitment to diversity must be implemented in a way that is both effective in achieving its goals and compliant with Alabama law, avoiding practices that could lead to reverse discrimination claims or undermine merit-based hiring. Careful judgment is required to ensure that affirmative action efforts are focused on expanding the applicant pool and providing equal opportunity, rather than setting quotas or engaging in preferential treatment based solely on protected characteristics. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and comprehensive approach to identifying underutilization of protected groups within the company's workforce, and then developing targeted strategies to broaden the recruitment reach. This includes actively seeking out qualified candidates from underrepresented backgrounds through diverse sourcing channels, partnerships with community organizations, and ensuring job postings are widely disseminated in areas likely to reach these groups. This approach aligns with the principles of affirmative action as interpreted under Alabama law, which emphasizes good faith efforts to overcome past discrimination and promote equal employment opportunities by expanding the applicant pool and ensuring fair consideration, without mandating specific hiring outcomes based on protected traits. The focus is on creating a level playing field and ensuring that all qualified individuals have a fair chance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on meeting numerical targets for hiring individuals from protected groups without a corresponding effort to broaden the applicant pool or ensure that candidates are qualified. This can lead to accusations of tokenism or reverse discrimination, as it may imply that hiring decisions are based on quotas rather than merit, which is not the intent or legal basis of affirmative action under Alabama law. Another incorrect approach is to discontinue all targeted recruitment efforts for underrepresented groups, believing that affirmative action is no longer necessary or that it inherently leads to unfair hiring. This fails to acknowledge the ongoing need to address potential systemic barriers and the legal requirements for employers to take affirmative steps to ensure equal employment opportunity, particularly if underutilization has been identified. A third incorrect approach is to rely exclusively on internal promotions and transfers without actively seeking external candidates from underrepresented groups. While internal development is important, this strategy may perpetuate existing demographic imbalances if the internal workforce does not reflect the diversity of the available labor market, thereby failing to address potential underutilization and the spirit of affirmative action. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach affirmative action by first conducting a thorough workforce analysis to identify any underutilization of protected groups. This analysis should inform the development of a written affirmative action plan that outlines specific, good faith efforts to recruit, hire, and promote individuals from these groups. The plan should focus on expanding the applicant pool, ensuring fair consideration of all candidates, and providing equal opportunities for development and advancement, all within the framework of Alabama labor and employment law. Regular review and evaluation of the plan's effectiveness are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and to make necessary adjustments. Question 10. Compliance review shows that Southern Comfort Construction, a company operating in Alabama, employs several project managers who are paid a fixed annual salary, plus a performance bonus paid quarterly, and are often required to work more than 40 hours per week. For the first quarter of the year, project manager Emily received a salary of $15,000, a performance bonus of $2,000, and worked a total of 520 hours. In a specific week during that quarter, Emily worked 50 hours. If Emily's base hourly rate, calculated by dividing her annual salary by 2,080 hours, is $15,000 per hour, how much overtime pay is she owed for that specific 50-hour week, assuming the bonus is allocated proportionally across the quarter? Option A, $75,000. Option B, $15,000. Option C, $22.50. Option D, $37.50. The correct answer is D, $37.50. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama wage and hour compliance, accurately calculating overtime for employees with fluctuating workweeks and varying pay rates. The professional challenge lies in ensuring adherence to both the Fair Labor Standards Act (FLSA) as interpreted by Alabama law and the specific terms of employment agreements, while avoiding underpayment and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities and maintain accurate payroll records. The best approach involves calculating the regular rate of pay for each workweek by dividing the total compensation for that week by the total number of hours worked in that week. Overtime is then paid at 1/2 of this calculated regular rate for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. This method correctly accounts for all forms of remuneration that constitute wages, including any fixed salary, bonuses, or other compensation, when determining the overtime rate. This aligns with the FLSA mandate that overtime be paid at a rate not less than 1 1/2 times the regular rate at which he is employed. Alabama follows the FLSA for minimum wage and overtime standards. An incorrect approach would be to simply pay overtime at one-half of the employee's base hourly rate, ignoring any additional compensation received during the workweek. This fails to accurately determine the regular rate, as defined by federal and state law, which includes all remuneration for employment. This would likely result in underpayment of overtime. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate overtime based on a fixed hourly rate derived from the employee's annual salary divided by a standard 40-hour workweek, regardless of the actual hours worked in a given week. This method does not account for the fluctuating nature of the employee's hours and compensation, and therefore does not accurately reflect the regular rate for that specific workweek, leading to potential underpayment. A further incorrect approach would be to pay overtime at the same rate as the regular hourly rate, rather than at 1.5 times the regular rate. This directly violates the statutory requirement for overtime pay and would constitute a significant wage and hour violation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the FLSA and any relevant Alabama Department of Labor interpretations. Employers must meticulously track all hours worked and all forms of compensation for each employee. When dealing with fluctuating workweeks or varied compensation structures, it is crucial to calculate the regular rate of pay on a weekly basis, ensuring that overtime is consistently paid at the legally mandated rate of 1.5 times that calculated regular rate. Consulting with legal counsel or a payroll specialist experienced in Alabama wage and hour laws is advisable when complex compensation structures are in place. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates a concern regarding the classification of a newly hired project coordinator in an Alabama-based technology firm. This individual is paid a fixed annual salary of $60,000 and is responsible for overseeing the workflow of several junior team members, coordinating project timelines, and preparing status reports for senior management. The firm's management is considering classifying this role as exempt from overtime pay under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, based on the salary and the supervisory aspects of the role. What is the most appropriate approach for the firm to determine the correct FLSA classification for this project coordinator? Option A. Conduct a detailed analysis of the project coordinator's primary duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific duties test requirements for an executive, administrative, or professional exemption under the FLSA, in addition to verifying the salary basis. Option B. Rely on the firm's past practices of classifying similar roles as exempt, without a specific review of the current employee's duties against current FLSA regulations. Option C. Classify the project coordinator as exempt because their annual salary of $60,000 exceeds the minimum salary threshold for most FLSA exemptions. Option D. Assume the project coordinator is exempt because the job title includes coordinator, implying a level of responsibility that typically aligns with exempt status. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed analysis of the project coordinator's primary duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific duties test requirements for an executive, administrative, or professional exemption under the FLSA, in addition to verifying the salary basis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for employers in Alabama regarding the classification of employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. Misclassifying a non-exempt employee as exempt can lead to significant financial penalties, back wages, and reputational damage. The professional challenge lies in accurately applying the FLSA complex exemption tests to a specific role, ensuring compliance with federal law while managing operational needs. Careful judgment is required to avoid both underpaying employees and unnecessarily increasing labor costs. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, role-specific analysis of the duties performed by the employee against the specific criteria outlined in the FLSA executive, administrative, and professional exemption tests. This approach prioritizes accurate classification based on the actual job functions and responsibilities, not just the job title or salary. Alabama employers are bound by the FLSA federal regulations, which require that an employee's primary duties meet the duties test and salary basis requirements for an exemption to apply. This meticulous review ensures that the employer is acting in good faith and in compliance with federal law, thereby mitigating legal risk and fostering a fair employment environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that an employee is exempt simply because they receive a salary above a certain threshold. This fails to recognize that the FLSA exemption tests have both a salary basis/level component and a stringent duties test. An employee can be highly compensated, but still be non-exempt if their primary duties do not meet the specific requirements for an executive, administrative, or professional exemption. Another incorrect approach is to classify an employee as exempt based solely on their job title, such as manager or supervisor. The FLSA clearly states that job title are not determinative of exempt status. The focus must be on the actual tasks and responsibilities performed by the employee on a day-to-day basis. Relying on a title alone is a superficial assessment that ignores the substance of the role. A third incorrect approach is to rely on outdated or informal understandings of exemption criteria without consulting current FLSA regulations or seeking expert advice. The FLSA regulations are subject to interpretation and updates, and outdated knowledge can lead to significant compliance errors. This approach demonstrates a lack of diligence in staying current with legal requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to employee classification. This begins with understanding the specific duties of the role. Next, compare these duties against the detailed requirements of each FLSA exemption. If there is any doubt, consult with legal counsel specializing in labor and employment law or a qualified HR professional. Document the classification decision-making process thoroughly, including the rationale and the evidence considered. Regularly review classifications, especially when job duties change. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a manufacturing company operating in Alabama is reviewing its employee compensation structure. The company has several employees who are paid a fixed salary, regardless of the hours worked. The company is considering classifying all these salaried employees as exempt from Alabama's minimum wage regulations to streamline payroll. What is the most appropriate approach for the company to ensure compliance with Alabama labor laws regarding minimum wage? Option A. Assume that since Alabama's minimum wage aligns with the federal minimum wage, no further state-specific review is necessary beyond federal guidelines. Option B. Rely on the job titles assigned to each salaried employee to determine their exemption status. Option C. Automatically classify all employees receiving a fixed salary as exempt from minimum wage requirements, as this is a common practice. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis of each salaried employee's primary job duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific legal criteria for exemption under Alabama and federal law. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed analysis of each salaried employee's primary job duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific legal criteria for exemption under Alabama and federal law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employer to navigate the complexities of Alabama's minimum wage laws while also considering the potential impact on employee morale and retention. Misinterpreting or misapplying the law can lead to significant legal penalties, back pay liabilities, and damage to the company's reputation. The core challenge lies in distinguishing between employees who are truly exempt from minimum wage requirements and those who are not, based on the specific duties performed. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the specific job duties and responsibilities of each employee against the criteria outlined in the Alabama Minimum Wage Act and relevant Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA exemptions, as Alabama law often defers to federal standards for exemptions. This approach ensures that only employees who unequivocally meet the legal definitions of exempt status e.g., executive, administrative, professional, outside sales, are not paid at least the state minimum wage. This meticulous, duty-based analysis is crucial for legal compliance and avoids broad-stroke assumptions that could lead to violations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume all salaried employees are exempt from minimum wage requirements. This is a significant regulatory failure because salary basis alone does not automatically confer exempt status. Alabama law, mirroring federal law, requires that exempt employees also meet specific duties tests related to their primary responsibilities. Failing to assess these duties means employees who are paid a salary but perform non-exempt tasks could be illegally underpaid. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on an employee's job title to determine exemption. Job titles are often superficial and do not accurately reflect the actual work performed. The law focuses on the nature of the employee's duties, not the label assigned to their position. Using a title as the sole determinant is a direct violation of the regulatory framework, which mandates a functional assessment of the role. A third incorrect approach is to only consider the federal minimum wage and disregard any potential state-specific nuances or higher state minimums if Alabama were to establish them independently of federal law, though currently, Alabama's minimum wage aligns with the federal FLSA. While Alabama's minimum wage currently mirrors the federal rate, a failure to stay abreast of any future state-specific legislative changes or interpretations could lead to non-compliance. The primary failure here is a lack of diligence in understanding the specific jurisdictional requirements, even when they align with federal standards, as the law could change. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to wage and hour compliance. This begins with a clear understanding of the applicable laws in the specific jurisdiction, Alabama. For minimum wage, this means identifying the current minimum wage rate and understanding the criteria for exemptions. When assessing exemption, the focus must always be on the employee's actual job duties and responsibilities, not on salary alone or job titles. Employers should conduct regular audits of their classification of employees to ensure ongoing compliance. In cases of doubt, consulting with legal counsel specializing in Alabama labor law is the most prudent course of action to mitigate risk. Question 13. Strategic planning requires a clear understanding of overtime pay requirements under Alabama law. A company in Birmingham, Alabama, has recently hired several employees who are paid a fixed annual salary, which is above the federal minimum salary threshold for exemption. The HR department is considering a policy that automatically classifies all salaried employees as exempt from overtime pay. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company to ensure compliance with Alabama's overtime regulations? Option A. Implement a policy that exempts all salaried employees from overtime pay, as this is a common practice among many businesses. Option B. Automatically classify all salaried employees as exempt from overtime pay because they receive a fixed salary above the federal minimum threshold. Option C. Assume that any employee with a title such as manager or specialist is automatically exempt from overtime pay. Option D. Conduct a detailed review of each salaried employee's primary job duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific criteria for an exemption under federal and Alabama law. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed review of each salaried employee's primary job duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific criteria for an exemption under federal and Alabama law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a common but often misunderstood aspect of wage and hour law: overtime eligibility for salaried employees. The employer faces the risk of significant back pay liability, penalties, and reputational damage if they misclassify employees or fail to comply with overtime requirements under Alabama law. The core challenge lies in distinguishing between exempt and non-exempt employees based on their duties and compensation, rather than simply their salary status. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the employee's actual job duties and responsibilities to determine if they meet the specific criteria for an exemption under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, as adopted and enforced by Alabama. This requires analyzing whether the employee's primary duties fall into executive, administrative, or professional categories, and if they meet the salary basis and salary level tests. If the employee's duties do not meet the strict requirements for an exemption, they must be classified as non-exempt and paid overtime for hours worked over 40 in a work week. This approach directly aligns with the legal mandate to classify employees correctly based on their function, not just their pay structure, ensuring compliance with Alabama's overtime pay requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. Classifying an employee as exempt solely because they receive a fixed salary, regardless of their actual job duties, is a significant regulatory failure. Alabama law, mirroring federal law, does not permit exemption based on salary alone. This approach ignores the critical duties test and is a direct violation of overtime pay requirements. Assuming that any employee with a title that sounds managerial or professional is automatically exempt is another regulatory failure. Exemption is determined by the nature of the work performed, not by a job title. This approach risks misclassifying many employees who are, in fact, entitled to overtime pay under Alabama law. Implementing a policy that automatically assumes all salaried employees are exempt without a specific, individualized assessment of their duties is a systemic failure. This broad-brush approach is highly likely to result in the misclassification of non-exempt employees, leading to violations of overtime pay requirements and potential legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach overtime classification by first understanding that salary status alone does not determine exemption. The primary focus must be on the employee's actual job duties and whether they align with the specific, narrowly defined criteria for executive, administrative, or professional exemptions. A systematic, documented review process for each employee is essential. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and classifying an employee as non-exempt is the safer and more legally compliant strategy, as the burden of proof for exemption rests with the employer. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in Alabama labor law is advisable for complex cases. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a clear understanding of the legal landscape. An Alabama-based small business owner is considering implementing a new performance review system and a revised employee handbook. They have heard about best practices from national business forums, but are unsure how these translate to Alabama's specific labor and employment laws. What is the most prudent course of action for the business owner to ensure their new policies are legally compliant within Alabama? Option A. Implement the performance review system and employee handbook based on general best practices discussed in national business forums, assuming they are broadly applicable. Option B. Consult with an Alabama licensed attorney specializing in labor and employment law to review the proposed performance review system and employee handbook for compliance with all relevant Alabama statutes and common law principles. Option C. Proceed with implementing the new policies immediately to streamline operations, with the intention of addressing any potential legal issues if they arise later. Option D. Rely on advice from a human resources consultant who has experience in other states, believing that employment law principles are largely uniform across the United States. The correct answer is B. Consult with an Alabama licensed attorney specializing in labor and employment law to review the proposed performance review system and employee handbook for compliance with all relevant Alabama statutes and common law principles. Explanation. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of the definition and scope of labor and employment law in Alabama to effectively navigate employer-employee relationships and mitigate legal risks. This scenario presents a common challenge where a business owner is seeking to implement new policies without fully grasping the legal implications, potentially leading to disputes and violations of established rights. The professional challenge lies in providing advice that is both legally sound and practically applicable, ensuring compliance with Alabama's specific statutory and common law framework governing employment. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of existing Alabama labor and employment laws to determine the legality and enforceability of the proposed policies. This includes examining statutes such as the Alabama Child Labor Act, the Alabama Minimum Wage Act, and relevant provisions of the Alabama Workers' Compensation Act, as well as considering common law principles related to wrongful termination, discrimination, and contract interpretation. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal framework governing employment in Alabama, ensuring that any policy implementation is compliant with state-specific regulations and case law, thereby protecting the employer from potential litigation and safeguarding employee rights. An approach that focuses solely on the employer's desired outcomes without consulting Alabama's labor laws is professionally unacceptable. This failure to consider the legal landscape could lead to the implementation of policies that violate state statutes or common law principles, such as discriminatory practices or breaches of implied contracts, exposing the business to significant legal liability. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely on general business practices or advice from other states without verifying their applicability to Alabama. Labor and employment laws are jurisdiction-specific, and what is permissible in one state may be illegal in Alabama. This oversight ignores the critical need for Alabama-specific legal counsel and could result in noncompliance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes cost-saving measures over legal compliance, such as avoiding legal consultation altogether, is also professionally unsound. While cost-effectiveness is important, it should not come at the expense of adhering to legal obligations. Ignoring legal requirements to save money is a short-sighted strategy that often results in far greater financial and reputational damage in the long run. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the specific legal jurisdiction, Alabama in this case, and then systematically researching and applying the relevant statutes, regulations, and case law. This involves consulting with legal counsel specializing in Alabama labor and employment law, conducting thorough due diligence on proposed policies, and prioritizing compliance with all applicable legal requirements. Question 15. The performance metrics show a significant decline in a sales representative's productivity over the last quarter, prompting concerns from management. The employee, however, claims the metrics are inaccurate and that their performance has been negatively impacted by a recent, unaddressed workplace issue. According to Alabama labor and employment law, what is the most appropriate course of action for the employer to take when addressing this situation, considering the employee's dispute of the data and their assertion of an underlying problem? Option A. Schedule a brief meeting with the employee to explain the performance metrics and instruct them to improve within a short time frame, without formally investigating their claims. Option B. Immediately issue a written warning to the employee based on the performance metrics, while advising them to address their personal concerns outside of the formal complaint process. Option C. Terminate the employee's employment due to the documented poor performance, assuming the metrics are accurate and the employee's claims are unsubstantiated. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation into the employee's performance metrics and the alleged workplace issue, following the company's established grievance procedure, and document all findings and actions. Correct answer is D. Initiate a formal investigation into the employee's performance metrics and the alleged workplace issue, following the company's established grievance procedure, and document all findings and actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between an employee's perception of unfair treatment and the employer's adherence to established grievance procedures. Navigating this requires a delicate balance of upholding company policy, ensuring fairness, and mitigating potential legal risks under Alabama law. The risk of an employee feeling unheard or unfairly dismissed can lead to further disputes, including potential claims of wrongful termination or retaliation if not handled properly. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves diligently following the established grievance procedure as outlined in the employee handbook and any applicable collective bargaining agreement. This means formally acknowledging the employee's complaint, conducting a thorough and impartial investigation into the performance metrics and the employee's concerns, and documenting all steps taken. This approach is correct because it demonstrates the employer's commitment to its own policies, provides a structured and fair process for resolving disputes, and creates a clear record of actions taken. Under Alabama law, employers are generally bound by their own established policies and procedures, and failing to follow them can weaken an employer's defense in subsequent legal actions. This systematic approach ensures due process for the employee and protects the employer by showing good faith and adherence to established protocols. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the employee's concerns outright without a formal investigation, citing only the performance metrics. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the employee's right to be heard and to challenge the data, potentially violating principles of fairness and due process. It also fails to explore potential mitigating factors or errors in the metrics themselves, leaving the employer vulnerable to claims of arbitrary or discriminatory action. Another incorrect approach is to bypass the formal grievance procedure and immediately move to disciplinary action or termination based solely on the performance metrics. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It circumvents the agreed-upon process for dispute resolution, which can be seen as a breach of implied contract or policy. In Alabama, while at-will employment is the general rule, employers can create contractual rights through their policies. Ignoring the grievance process can be interpreted as a failure to act in good faith. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial investigation that does not genuinely seek to understand the employee's perspective or investigate the validity of the performance metrics. This is professionally damaging as it undermines the credibility of the grievance process and can lead to the employee feeling further alienated and unfairly treated. Ethically, it represents a lack of commitment to fairness and can foster a climate of distrust within the workplace. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the importance of established grievance procedures as a cornerstone of fair employment practices and a risk mitigation tool. The decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging the employee's complaint promptly and respectfully. 2. Reviewing the relevant company policies and any collective bargaining agreements to ensure strict adherence to the prescribed grievance steps. 3. Conducting a comprehensive and unbiased investigation, which includes gathering all relevant data, performance metrics, employee statements, witness accounts, etc., and assessing their accuracy and context. 4. Documenting every stage of the process meticulously. 5. Communicating the findings and any subsequent decisions to the employee in a clear and professional manner, referencing the investigation and policy. This structured approach ensures legal compliance, promotes a fair and transparent work environment, and minimizes the likelihood of protracted disputes. Question 16. The efficiency study reveals a potential for significant cost saving through restructuring certain departments within a company operating in Alabama. The study's findings suggest that consolidating roles and potentially reducing headcount in these departments could lead to substantial financial benefits. The company is considering implementing these changes. What is the most legally compliant and ethically sound approach for the company to take regarding its employees in light of the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA? Option A. Use the efficiency study as justification to dismiss employees who have been vocal about workplace issues or have recently engaged in union organizing activities. Option B. Threaten employees with disciplinary action if they express concerns or organize to oppose the proposed departmental restructuring. Option C. Implement the restructuring immediately based on the study's findings to realize cost savings, informing employees only after the changes have been finalized. Option D. Proactively communicate the study's findings and potential implications to employees and their representatives, offering opportunities for discussion, feedback, and negotiation regarding the proposed restructuring. The correct answer is D. Proactively communicate the study's findings and potential implications to employees and their representatives, offering opportunities for discussion, feedback, and negotiation regarding the proposed restructuring. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential for significant cost savings through restructuring certain departments. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts employees' job security and raises questions about the company's obligations under federal labor law, specifically the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, which governs the rights of most private sector employees to organize, to engage in collective bargaining, and to take part in concerted activities for their mutual aid or protection. The company must navigate these potential changes while respecting employee rights and avoiding unfair labor practices. Careful judgment is required to balance business needs with legal compliance and ethical treatment of the workforce. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging with employees and their representatives, if any, regarding the proposed changes. This includes providing clear and timely information about the study's findings, the potential implications for employees, and the company's rationale. It also entails offering opportunities for discussion, feedback, and negotiation, particularly if the restructuring could lead to layoffs or significant changes in working conditions. This approach is correct because it aligns with the spirit and letter of the NLRA, which encourages open communication and bargaining. By fostering transparency and collaboration, the company demonstrates respect for employee rights and can mitigate potential disputes, thereby avoiding unfair labor practice charges. This proactive engagement is crucial for maintaining a positive labor relations environment and ensuring compliance with Section 8 of the NLRA, which prohibits unfair labor practices. An incorrect approach would be to implement the restructuring without any prior consultation or notification to employees or their union, if one exists. This failure to communicate and negotiate would likely be viewed as a unilateral change in terms and conditions of employment, potentially violating the employer's duty to bargain under the NLRA. Another incorrect approach is to misrepresent the findings of the efficiency study, or to use the study as a pretext to retaliate against union organizers or employees who have engaged in protected concerted activity. Such actions would constitute serious unfair labor practices under Section 8A of the NLRA, leading to legal challenges and penalties. Finally, an approach that involves threatening employees with adverse consequences if they express concerns or resist the proposed changes would also be a violation of their rights under the NLRA. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical considerations. This involves thoroughly understanding the NLRA provisions, particularly concerning employer obligations during organizational changes. Before implementing any significant changes, a risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential legal pitfalls. Consultation with legal counsel specializing in labor law is essential. The framework should emphasize open communication, good faith bargaining with employee representatives, and a commitment to treating employees fairly and with respect throughout the process. Question 17. Implementation of a unionization drive at a manufacturing facility in Alabama has commenced, and management is seeking guidance on how to legally communicate its position to employees regarding the potential formation of a union. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employer to take to navigate this situation in compliance with federal labor law? Option A. Communicate factual information about the potential economic impacts of unionization on the company and employees, while clearly stating that employees have the right to organize and make their own decisions, without making threats or promises. Option B. Announce that if employees vote against the union, their current wages and benefits will be permanently increased. Option C. Inform employees that if the union is certified, the company will be forced to implement significant layoffs due to increased labor costs. Option D. Conduct individual meetings with employees to ask them directly about their involvement in the union organizing efforts and their personal views on unionization. The correct answer is A. Communicate factual information about the potential economic impacts of unionization on the company and employees, while clearly stating that employees have the right to organize and make their own decisions, without making threats or promises. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires a delicate balance between an employer's right to express its views on unionization and the employee's protected right to organize. Missteps can lead to unfair labor practice charges, undermining the certification process, and potentially leading to significant legal and financial repercussions for the employer. Careful judgment is required to ensure all communications are lawful and do not interfere with, restrain, or coerce employees in the exercise of their rights under the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, as interpreted and enforced by the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. The best professional approach involves a neutral stance that respects employees' rights, while allowing the employer to share factual information about the potential impacts of unionization. This approach prioritizes open communication without coercion. It acknowledges the employer's right to express its opinion on the matter, provided it does not threaten, promise benefits, or interrogate employees about their union activities. This aligns with the NLRB interpretation of employer free speech rights under Section 8C of the NLRA, which permits employers to express any views, arguments, or opinions concerning labor disputes, as long as such expression contains no threat of reprisal or force or promise of benefit. The focus is on providing information and allowing employees to make an informed decision without undue influence. An approach that involves threatening employees with job loss if they unionize is a direct violation of their protected rights under the NLRA. Such threats constitute unlawful coercion and interference with union organizing activities, making the employer vulnerable to unfair labor practice charges and potentially invalidating any election results. Another incorrect approach is to promise employees improved wages and benefits specifically conditioned on voting against the union. This constitutes an unlawful inducement to refrain from union activity, which is a form of bribery and interference with employee rights. The NLRA prohibits employers from promising benefits to discourage unionization. Finally, an approach that involves interrogating employees about their union sympathies or activities in a manner that suggests surveillance or potential reprisal is also unlawful. While employers can express their views, they cannot engage in coercive interrogations that chill employees' willingness to discuss or engage in union activities. This type of conduct is considered an unfair labor practice under the NLRA. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the NLRA and relevant NLRB precedent. This involves consulting with legal counsel specializing in labor law to ensure all communications and actions are compliant. The framework should prioritize employee rights, maintain neutrality where appropriate, and focus on factual information dissemination rather than coercive tactics or promises. Regular training for management and supervisory staff on labor relations law is crucial to prevent inadvertent violations. Question 18. To address the challenge of a union organizing campaign, a manufacturing facility in Birmingham, Alabama, what is the most prudent and legally compliant approach for the employer's management team to adopt regarding employee communications and interactions during this period and the subsequent collective bargaining process? Option A. Proactively discourage employees from discussing unionization during non-work hours and in non-work areas, and communicate the potential for facility closure if the union is successful. Option B. Unilaterally implement changes to wages and benefits that the employer deems beneficial to employees once a union has filed for an election or been certified, without engaging in bargaining with the union. Option C. Diligently review all communications and actions related to the union organizing campaign and collective bargaining process to ensure they are factual, non-coercive, and comply with the National Labor Relations Act, while also ensuring management is trained on permissible employer speech and conduct. Option D. Engage in surveillance of union organizing activities and retaliate against employees who are vocal supporters of the union by terminating or disciplining them. The correct answer is C. Diligently review all communications and actions related to the union organizing campaign and collective bargaining process to ensure they are factual, non-coercive, and comply with the National Labor Relations Act, while also ensuring management is trained on permissible employer speech and conduct. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent power imbalance between an employer and employees during the formation of a union. Navigating the collective bargaining process requires strict adherence to Alabama's labor laws to ensure fairness, prevent unfair labor practices, and uphold the rights of both parties. Missteps can lead to legal challenges, union decertification, and significant damage to employee relations. The employer's actions must be carefully scrutinized to ensure they do not interfere with, restrain, or coerce employees in the exercise of their rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the employer's management team diligently reviewing all communications and actions related to the union organizing campaign and the subsequent collective bargaining process. This includes ensuring that all statements made to employees are factual, non-coercive, and do not threaten or promise benefits contingent on union activity. Management should also be thoroughly trained on the provisions of the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, as applied in Alabama, to understand what constitutes permissible employer speech and conduct versus unfair labor practices. This proactive stance, focusing on education and strict compliance with legal boundaries, is crucial for fostering a legitimate bargaining environment and avoiding legal entanglements. The employer's role is to bargain in good faith once a union is certified, not to undermine the organizing effort or the bargaining process itself. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves management actively discouraging employees from discussing unionization during non-work hours and in non-work areas, or threatening to close the facility if the union is successful. Such actions directly violate employees' rights under the NLRA to organize and bargain collectively, constituting illegal interference and coercion. Another incorrect approach is for the employer to unilaterally implement changes to wages or benefits after a union has filed for an election or been certified, without bargaining with the union. This bypasses the collective bargaining process and is an unfair labor practice. Finally, an employer engaging in surveillance of union organizing activities or retaliating against employees for supporting the union by terminating or disciplining them is a clear violation of labor law and constitutes illegal union busting. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a risk-averse and compliance-focused mindset. The decision-making framework should prioritize understanding and strictly adhering to the NLRA and relevant Alabama case law. This involves consulting with legal counsel specializing in labor law, conducting thorough internal reviews of all communications and proposed actions, and prioritizing employee rights. When in doubt, the safest course of action is to err on the side of caution and seek legal guidance rather than risk engaging in conduct that could be construed as an unfair labor practice. The goal is to facilitate a fair and lawful process, not to impede it. Question 19. The review process indicates that a long-term employee in Alabama has filed a formal complaint alleging that their direct supervisor has been making disparaging remarks about their age and has been assigning them less desirable tasks compared to younger colleagues, suggesting a pattern of age-based discrimination. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company to take in response to this allegation? Option A. Conduct a brief conversation with the supervisor to confirm their denial, and then inform the employee that no further action will be taken. Option B. Initiate a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into the employee's allegations, gathering all relevant documentation and interviewing all parties involved, including the complainant, the supervisor, and any potential witnesses. Option C. Begin documenting the employee's performance issues to build a case for their eventual termination, believing this will preemptively address the complaint. Option D. Immediately dismiss the complaint, as the supervisor has a strong performance record and has denied making any discriminatory remarks. The correct answer is B. Initiate a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into the employee's allegations, gathering all relevant documentation and interviewing all parties involved, including the complainant, the supervisor, and any potential witnesses. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential employment discrimination claim under Alabama law, presenting a professionally challenging situation due to the sensitive nature of discrimination allegations and the potential for significant legal and reputational damage to the employer. Careful judgment is required to navigate these allegations effectively and ethically, ensuring compliance with Alabama's specific anti-discrimination statutes and federal laws incorporated by reference or common practice. The best professional approach involves a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into the employee's allegations. This includes gathering all relevant documentation, interviewing all parties involved, including the complainant, the accused, and any witnesses, and assessing the credibility of the information obtained. The investigation should be conducted by a neutral party, such as HR or legal counsel, to ensure objectivity. Following the investigation, appropriate remedial action should be taken if discrimination is substantiated. Measures should be implemented to prevent future occurrences. This approach aligns with the principles of fairness, due process, and compliance with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as any applicable Alabama-specific employment laws that prohibit discrimination based on protected characteristics. The goal is to address the alleged discrimination effectively while minimizing legal risk and fostering a respectful workplace. An approach that involves dismissing the complaint without a formal investigation, based solely on the accused manager's denial, is professionally unacceptable. This failure to investigate violates the employer's duty to take prompt and effective action to address discrimination allegations. It can lead to a hostile work environment claim and demonstrates a disregard for employee rights, potentially violating Title VII and Alabama's public policy against employment discrimination. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to conduct a superficial investigation that only interviews the accused manager and relies heavily on their account, without seeking corroborating evidence or interviewing other potential witnesses. This lack of thoroughness undermines the credibility of the investigation and fails to provide a fair assessment of the situation. It can result in a failure to identify and rectify discriminatory practices, exposing the employer to legal liability. Finally, an approach that involves retaliating against the employee who filed the complaint, such as through demotion or termination, is a severe ethical and legal failure. Retaliation is explicitly prohibited under anti-discrimination laws, including Title VII. Such an action would not only exacerbate the original discrimination claim, but also create a new, independent cause of action for retaliation, significantly increasing the employer's legal exposure and damaging its reputation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and objective approach to handling discrimination complaints. This framework should include 1. Immediate acknowledgement of the complaint. 2. A commitment to a prompt and impartial investigation. 3. Thorough documentation of all steps taken. 4. Objective assessment of evidence. 5. Appropriate remedial action based on findings. And 6. Proactive measures to prevent recurrence. This structured process ensures that allegations are treated with the seriousness they deserve, and that the employer acts in accordance with legal and ethical obligations. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that in Alabama, a manufacturing company implemented a new policy requiring all employees to attend mandatory, unpaid team-building sessions immediately following their shifts. These sessions, which last for 1 hour, are presented by management as crucial for improving workplace morale and productivity. However, several employees have expressed concerns that these sessions are being used to discourage union organizing efforts, as discussions often steer towards the perceived downsides of collective bargaining. If an unfair labor practice charge is filed, and it is determined that 10 employees were negatively impacted for an average of 3 months, with an average weekly wage of $800, what is the minimum potential back pay liability the company could face under the Alabama Unfair Labor Practices Act, assuming the sessions were deemed coercive and interfered with organizing rights? Option A, $12,000. Option B, $48,000. Option C, $24,000. Option D, $96,000. The correct answer is D, $96,000. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpreting Alabama's Unfair Labor Practices Act (ULPA) concerning employer interference with employee organizing activities. The employer's actions, while seemingly aimed at improving productivity, could be construed as coercive, thereby violating employee rights. Careful judgment is required to distinguish legitimate business interests from unlawful interference. The best professional approach involves a thorough assessment of the employer's actions against the specific provisions of the Alabama ULPA, particularly those prohibiting interference, restraint, or coercion of employees in the exercise of their rights to organize. This approach requires calculating the potential financial impact of a proven unfair labor practice charge. If the employer's actions are found to be coercive, the Alabama Department of Labor could order remedies such as back pay for any employees demonstrably harmed by the interference. To assess this risk, one must consider the average wage of the affected employees and the potential duration of the interference. For instance, if 10 employees were demonstrably affected by the employer's actions for an average of 3 months, and their average weekly wage is $800, the potential back pay liability would be calculated as follows. \text potential back pay equals \text number of employees times \text average weekly wage times \text number of weeks affected \text potential back pay equals 10 times $800 times 3 text months times 4 text week month text potential back pay equals 10 times $800 times 12 text potential back pay equals $96,000. This calculation provides a quantifiable estimate of the financial risk associated with a potential unfair labor practice finding, allowing for informed decision-making regarding the employer's conduct. An incorrect approach involves dismissing the employee's concerns without a proper legal review, assuming that any action taken by management is inherently permissible. This fails to acknowledge the protections afforded to employees under the Alabama ULPA, which explicitly prohibits employers from interfering with their right to organize. Such a dismissal could lead to a formal complaint and significant penalties if the actions are indeed found to be unlawful. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the employer's stated intent, e.g., improving productivity, without objectively evaluating the impact of their actions on employee organizing efforts. The Alabama ULPA focuses on the effect of employer conduct, not just the intent behind it. If the employer's actions, regardless of intent, tend to intimidate or coerce employees from exercising their rights, it can constitute an unfair labor practice. Finally, an incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal evidence or general business practices, without consulting the specific language and interpretations of the Alabama LPA. Legal compliance requires adherence to established statutes and regulations, not assumptions about what might be acceptable in other contexts. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying potential legal risks by carefully reviewing employee complaints and employer actions against relevant statutes, such as the Alabama LPA. 2. Quantifying potential financial exposure by performing calculations based on statutory remedies and factual circumstances. 3. Seeking expert legal counsel to interpret the law and advise on the specific facts of the case. 4. Documenting all assessments, communications, and decisions to create a clear record of due diligence and compliance efforts.